Okay, man, I hope you're not too impatient, but I'm moving slower than I used to. I didn't lose it, whatever it was you lost. So, the case for Yucca Mountain. It's been a political football for 30, 40 years now, a lot of it because of opinion politics instead of research of the science and engineering of it. So, I put this information together. I do a lot of research with the companies across the planet, really. Areva, the one in the center here, is the largest nuclear company in the world, Areva of France. Ironically, they have about 4,000 employees in this country who doing the maintenance and things on our current nuclear plants, and we still have 102 operating today. Entergy was a nuclear company back east that built several plants and provided a lot of information. People sometimes don't know that 20% of the power in the United States of America over the past 30 or 40 years has come from nuclear power generation. So I'm just going to move on here, if I can find my page down. Okay. The information I have out back is handoutable too, and I try to make this larger enough so that you can see. When I talk about the study, we're talking about a 30-year study of, through 8 of America's national scientific laboratories. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the country don't know about our labs. The Department of Energy has 12 totally. And they are some of the best research institutions on the planet. I've toured INL, the Idaho National Laboratory, 3 or 4 times myself. They even do subcontracting work for China and some other countries that don't have the machinery and equipment that they do have up in Idaho. So you can go down through these bullet lists. There's a taxpayer investment. It is an investment. Recommendations from 100 colleges, yada yada, reviewed by more than 200 scientists, engineers at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They did the study. And it was several years when basically they drilled a 6-mile tunnel, 22 feet in diameter, 6-mile U into Yucca Mountain and came back out. I toured it in 2006. At that time, 90% of the people who visited the Yucca Mountain tour came out saying, man, that thing is safe, let's build it. Harry Reid shut it down. Stopped the tours at Yucca Mountain. Every foot that they drilled into that mountain, they analyzed the science and engineering of every foot geologically as they were going. They took the moisture samples, water, and all of those things were calculated. And that's where it sits right now. The study itself sits at the DOE waiting for completion of the analysis. That's where it's at. When I came out of that, they showed a building that was about a 14 by 14 foot building, room, about 4 or 5 feet high, full of documents that they had studied during that process. And the primary studying was done by 2 companies. Areva was one, the other one was AECOM out of their corporate down in LA. Areva is France, AECOM is a US company, and they were scheduled to do all of the study for it. Again here, this bullet list is on the table if you can pick up, and there's literature out there that you're welcome to have, but it talks about these things. People don't realize 9 of Nevada's 17 counties support completing that application process. And Nevada's, this was almost comical to me, Nevada's opposition contentions were contracted through China, Japan, and the UK. They were given $97 million with the supposedly to parallel study the process as it was going. Nevada didn't use the funds for that purpose. So these things are pretty interesting, and they're, in my mind, they're pretty conclusive, and I look at all of this analysis and things that we've done and try to base them on grassroots basics of common sense, deductive reasoning, and those kinds of logic, common sense and deductive reasoning. So I'll just go through these. This toward the Hawthorne Army Depot would be an ideal place, even temporarily, to move all of the current above-ground storage that are at these 97 nuclear plants now that still have the dry casks now. After they cool them off for 4 or 5 years, they move it into dry cask storage, and those are capable of being moved out, and I think that they should be moved out to Hawthorne. There's a great reputation here. There's rail stuff into the Hawthorne Depot, and there has been discussion nationally about trying to consolidate the temporary stuff. Some of the problem we have at the national level is there are still 100 plants operating. Many, well, I'd have to guess at a number, but I know that 30 or 40 of them have renewed their applications for an additional 20 years of operating. They were originally designed to operate for 80 years. So they were able to advance their licensing for another 20 years. Problem is that their required area on plant storage of temporary fuel is overloaded. So they're having to build more temporary storage on the current nuclear sites because we haven't built Yucca Mountain. And it's costing us billions a year, taxpayers' money, billions more, because we have to pay for them adding that temporary storage on those plants because we haven't moved the stuff off the Yucca Mountain. So that's part of that problem. But anyway, the Hawthorne Depot is ideal for it. I keep plugging away at reduce, recycle, and reuse. These are states that support nuclear, states that have a couple of policies to impede, and states that are neutral. Nevada is a neutral state, but you wouldn't know it if you talked to a politician. The safest thing to do is don't talk to a politician. Here, we need more energy in order to compete in industrial manufacturing. Nuclear is that answer. It's carbon-free. It's the highest output. Nuclear outputs 93% is output efficiency compared to solar, which is 23 or 25% of its operating function. But the thing is, China is building 40 nuclear plants right now. China has the worst air pollution in the world, right? They're getting out of the coal. They were building a coal plant a month for many, many years. They're building nuclear plants. When they have those plants operating and in working, their industrial manufacturing will dwarf us in a heartbeat. Not that they don't do it already. But we have to think that these things are only done by energy. And when I talk about the state of Nevada, I also look at the fact that while they want to make it a solar state, which is fine because you have the sun and the land. But in order to develop the land in the state of Nevada, you have to have energy and water. And the two largest contributing factors to supporting that issue is nuclear power. Desalination. We can build a nuclear plant and desalinate on the coast, trade it off with the water, and the same thing with the Lake Mead situation down in Vegas. We have 50 years of experience with above ground storage. The NRC has approved designs in approximately 72 locations nationwide for the past 40 years. We've been doing this. You don't find out about it at the grassroots level because The government, they're kind of busy doing it, but what I've been trying to do is get our local politicians in the state and in Washington, Amadei and those guys, to go up and tour the Idaho National Laboratory. That's where the answers are for us to find out. Anybody here can do that. All you have to do is go up there and schedule a meeting and tour that laboratory. And I make it a joke, but if you remember, and I mentioned this to a couple of people, DOE Chairman Rick Perry, during the election, he said, well, what do we need? We need the Department of Energy for. It's a waste. When Trump assigned him to the DOE as secretary, Rick Perry went and toured the Idaho National Laboratory. He did a 360 right there. When you see what they're doing with advanced nuclear fuels on molten salt reactors and these small modular reactors, they're working on those things up there in the research labs. When you see what they're doing, completely change your attitude and your understanding about nuclear development. I'm going to click down through here. Spent fuel storage is planned temporarily. We're having problems with some leakage and things like that they talk about, and this is why. We were putting things aside 30 and 40 years ago with plans within 5 or 10 years to be moved off the Yucca Mountain. All of those things have been delayed because of the opinion politics in the state of Nevada. So these things are inevitable. What are you going to do? Like I mentioned, the above ground Nevada would be ideal for an above ground. Completing the permanent repository Yucca is really very important, and you have to be able to get through the. I don't know how you get through the politics, because it's illogical to me how these guys operate. But anyway, these are available, and I have this presentation on the website as also. The myth: Americans don't want nuclear energy. 80% of the people who live within 10 miles of a nuclear plant today have no problems with it at all. They're there, they basically understand it, and it's never a problem. But it's people's awareness that they don't understand how they're operating. So we got to solve the temporary storage thing, and we got to do it sooner than later, and it's later now because of the opinion politics. Spent fuel is not a waste. 96% is reprocessable. And anyone against this will tell you that it's not feasible. France is reprocessing all of the nuclear waste for they call it the European Union right now. They're reprocessing it down to 6%. And in La Hague, France, they have this repository, and all of that fuel, after being reprocessed, is about the size of a basketball court, and you can walk in there, and it's like walking into a surgical installation in a hospital. It's absolutely pristine. But the thing is, it's not financially, and I'll accept that. But we know, if you look back 20 years ago, and you talked with someone about having a cell phone, that was the Dick Tracy days, remember that? And you tell, well, you're kind of crazy, it's not going to happen. I have one here, and half of you people up, or probably 3/3 of you people, 3/3. I always, not good in math, but anyway, have cell phones. Science and engineering does get there, and that's what's going to happen. When our inventory for Yucca Mountain at 70,000 metric tons is economically feasible to reprocess, they're doing it in France to reduce the size so there's not as much to deal with. So it's financially flat. when we are able to reprocess our 70,000 tons at an economic profit, in other words, when it's reprocessed, we can sell it for new fuel at a profit. When that occurs, that 70,000 tons, estimated at 10 to 20 years from now, is what we're estimating on the science and engineering catching up. At that time, it'll be worth $14 trillion. The professional engineer Koch in 2013 went to a convention in Amsterdam and had calculated that the entire world's inventory of spent nuclear fuel was worth $100 trillion. And I asked him specifically on our 70,000 metric tons. But anyway, let's try to get through here. That's what a spent fuel dry cast looks like there on the right. And on the left, I've been in that room. That's the water cooling plant at the Idaho National Laboratory. That water, there's an awful lot of water up in Idaho where that particular place is, so they have no problem with it. But 20 feet down is where those spent fuel rods are, and they're 16 feet deep. You can literally jump in that water and swim on top of that water without being bothered. But if you dive down 15 feet, you won't hit the surface again. It's really dangerous stuff. And that's what people fear, but we have a better understanding of this than we have ever had before. And that's the importance of it, to know that we have people that are working in these laboratories and understand it extremely well. That's a shot of a nuclear plant and what the values is to a computer. The values are to a state and the environment that they are operating in. Our next move will be towards the SMR, small modular reactors. Talking about a reactor the size of a double-sized refrigerator. The reactor itself, we can put many of them up in different places. Ideal for remote locations, would be practical right now for NV Energy to start looking at. And they're talking about deliveries on these probably around 2030, 2025 in that area. For serving remote areas, that also would be a tremendous asset to our national security if we could put 100 or 200 small modular reactors up across the country as far as providing backup energy requirements for both remote areas, but also in case we get taken down our major current electrical production facilities that are done with coal and the other. Anyway, that gives you an idea of what a nuclear plant generates in place. Again, if you ever get an opportunity to visit a national laboratory, it's definitely worth it. Fighting for 30 years, and I had to do this. This is a design cutout of what they call a side drift. So in the tunnel, you've got 6 miles, but off to the side, you're putting the side drifts off of the storage in there. And you can see that they're going into casks. And, to respond to Harry Reid's comment back during this time, he called this junk science, and he called it a dump. Well, that doesn't look like a dump to me. And I came back with that comment. I said, well, I'd rather call it junk politics than junk science. So anyway, that's my take on that. And that's exactly what it would look like. These things are pretty phenomenal. Anything that they do with high technology stuff like nuclear and things like that is extremely well planned. This year runs the number of the power output through the different sources of coal, rates, coal, hydro, solar, etc., and nuclear down here. You can see the efficiency of it. It's pretty impressive. The number of people who are losing from the carbon emissions, fossil fuels, are astounding. I couldn't believe it. 4,000 people a year in China were dying from cancer and those kinds of things. When you start studying it, holy mackerel, what are we doing this for? That gives you an idea. And that's, good night. Questions? Yes?
Hypothetically, what would happen to it if there were an earthquake?
It would probably fall into a bigger crack in the ground. I often make the similarity that radiation, spent fuel, and those things are like a grill that you have in the back of the house. You have those charcoal briquettes. Well, when they're fired up and they're going, if you run over and touch them, you're going to burn yourself. So if there's an accident where the radiation is exposed, stay away. That's the idea. But these casks that they're talking about moving them in are basically impenetrable. It's like trying to destroy an anvil. And I think most of the people in the room know what an anvil is. Maybe not that kid over there. But it's pretty rough. Well, they've done them. They've sent the casks into a concrete wall at 80 miles an hour on a train. And the thing smashes through the wall, but the cask itself does not violate the inside of the where the spent fuel rods are stored. They'd not get violated. You know, they engineer these things so that the front end of it, it looks like a barbell. So it has that big hunk on the front end and one on the back. So no matter what it does, you know, if you roll the truck over, the cask is going to roll down the road and it'll smash a few cars up and telephone poles, but it's not going to violate the cask. So I don't even want to logically talk about that argument. She was next, sorry. Right.
At the beginning you talked about how China and other nations spend a lot of time and money trying to oppose this. I don't understand what would be the reason. Why would they be doing it?
Cash flow. If you're offering, China, you offer, look, they can't make kids' toys safely, can you? So are you going to contract with China to have them give you a technical analysis of the geology at Yucca Mountain? It makes, maybe you don't, I'll try to, it was a contract. They were hired and paid money to generate opposition science.
Why? That's my
Well,
question.
because the state of Nevada did not want to parallel study our technical information. They went to China and said, can you find some information that opposes this, and for what reason? Well, China, it's a cash flow. Yeah, I'll take the contract, we'll see what we can find, and basically that's the idea behind it. They never did. The irony is that what we've done in this country in reference to Yucca Mountain is every other country in the world has decided and moved in the direction of deep geologic storage. They talked about sending it to the sun and the Mars and all of that stuff. But when it came down to it, every other country in the world agreed with the U.S. that the safest place for it is deep geologic storage. So with those side drifts built in there and those things put in there, if an earthquake did take that out, the earthquake would be so severe that they keep talking about California separating from the continental United States. It would not be our worry. I just can't see it. The mountain itself is a safety zone. It does not look like I answered your question. Ask me.
What I got from it is that my thinking was wrong. What you were saying is they were getting revenue to do this study and research.
Yes.
And I was understanding that they were spending money, so
No, they were getting
that
revenues.
was the clarification.
I think the similarity today is buying a kid's way into Harvard. Sorry. Another question. Yeah, go ahead.
Two questions, if I might. Do we have any idea when small modular reactors will be operational? That's the first one. And the second one is, since this has been going on for 40 years, I presume that the state's opposition predates Harry Reid. Where does it come from? Is it just fear?
I don't know if the opposition does predate Harry Reid.
I guess he's old enough, huh?
Well, I'm getting up there also, and I don't know if I can answer that question. But the syndrome where the state of Nevada says that we don't want Yucca Mountain because we didn't make the nuclear waste, well, that's BS, because for at least 10 or 14 years, state of Nevada was buying power off the grid generated by Palo Verde in Arizona. Palo Verde nuclear station, the largest single two-unit nuclear stations in the country in Arizona. But that's relatively irrelevant. But, say that, okay, all you people are from Nevada and I'm from Washington, D.C. Why do you think this country put a lot of the land aside in the West Coast years ago? We have some tremendous national parks out here, okay? You can have all the land in Nevada. What are you going to do? We don't have the ability to build in a desert. What do we need? Energy and water. There's no water in the desert. And the only way to get to it would be to drill 50,000 feet, and the only way to do that is with a nuclear power plant. So, you know, what can you possibly develop? But from being from Washington, you're looking at some real outside desolate land. That's why we have the test ranges out here. You're going to have a test range over Washington, D.C., or you want to go out into the ocean? I mean, these things are logical things. I don't understand why the Harry Reid and the guys that are opposed to this don't understand that we're serving the country. Think about it. We're serving the country. And I was a fan of the bomb in the Second World War. I had an uncle that served on Saipan and Tinian over there. And they estimated 2 million people. If we didn't drop that atomic bomb, 2 million more people would die in that war if we didn't end it. So those things had to happen. And we've forgotten about it. But, go ahead.
What's the estimated financial income for the state of Nevada if they let Yucca
Yes.
become an entity?
I have a hard time with that. I'm an entrepreneur by nature. I'm not a fan of, what do they call it, the Alaska pipeline. My whole interest in the development of that and the $14 trillion that it could be is all based on business. I see 4,000 scientists and engineers coming into the state to build it. I see 4,000 scientists and engineers get into the state. If you can get the state